Good morning to you all. My name is Anne Cristani and I am the project lead for Resilient Villages. I am also your MC for today's event. So along with our co-host, New South Wales Council of Social Services and Local Community Services Association, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Community-Led Disaster Resilience Forum. We are so pleased that you are able to join us this morning, and we think that you will find today's forum informative, thought-provoking and inspiring. Before I get on to general housekeeping, I would first like to acknowledge with great respect the traditional owners of the land on which I am meeting with you, the Gundungurra and Darug traditional owners, who have sustainably managed and lived in a harmonious balance with the land and waters of the Blue Mountains. This traditional ownership was never ceded or surrendered, and the relationships with and profound care for country that Gundungurra and Darug traditional owners still hold continues today. I would also like to pay my respects to our Indigenous brothers and sisters who may be joining us today. Now, I'm going to run through some quick tech housekeeping so that today runs as smoothly as possible and you get the most out of the webinar today. So due to the large number of registrations we received, over 174, I believe, to attend today, the event is being run as a Zoom webinar instead of a meeting in order to help things run smoothly and avoid interruptions from people accidentally unmuting or appearing on screen during one of our speakers or panelists' presentations. Although attendees will not be able to turn on your camera or microphone, we do encourage everyone to engage in today's forum. There are two main ways to do this. If you look on your screen underneath the main video, you will see chat and Q&A options. By using the chat function, you can make comments and have discussions with fellow attendees and speakers. This is your space to engage with each other and the event. There is also a Q&A option, which can be used to ask questions aimed at our speakers or panelists. Just in the interest of time, I would encourage you to leave your questions till after the panel discussion. If you have a question that you would like answered, please use the Q&A function, not the chat. Someone will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the event to select relevant questions to put up to our panelists. One way to ensure a question is answered is to click the thumbs up icon. This is called upvoting. Questions that have the most votes or thumbs up have a higher chance of being put to our speakers and panelists. The raise hand function will not be a feature used in today's forum. Please use the chat or Q&A instead if you have something to say. The other thing just to make note of is that today's event is being recorded so that we can share it after the event. A copy of the chat messages and questions raised in the Q&A during the event will be saved for documentation and follow-up purposes only. If you have any questions or concerns about what is recorded, you can contact me and I'll make my contact details available. Okay, so that's all the housekeeping done. Let's get on with the show. Slide 2, please, Anthony. Thank you. Okay, so a little bit about me and the context for the webinar today. Could I have slide 2, please, Anthony? Thank you so much. So over the last 12 years, I have had the privilege of walking alongside many communities who have been impacted by natural disasters in New South Wales. I have been witness to how communities rapidly mobilise and self-organise to provide immediate and long-term support to their neighbours and fellow community members. Over this time, I've witnessed the incredible resourcefulness, creativity, courage and sheer determination that so many communities demonstrate time and time again during the most challenging of times. We are seeing this currently playing out across communities in Queensland and northern New South Wales in the aftermath of ex-tropical cyclone Alfred, where once again local community resilience groups are stepping up to support their communities through yet another disaster event. The key lesson that we are slowly learning is that preparing for, responding to, and recovering from natural disasters is literally everybody's business, as the impacts are experienced across all aspects of society. The need for increased collaboration, partnership, and collective action is an urgent priority if we as a society are going to have any hope in adapting to climate change and all the disruptions and upheaval that brings. What is being called for is urgent action to build bridges that connect and coordinate activities that support greater disaster resilience for everyone. It is so pleasing to see the high level of interest coming from all levels of government, emergency services, and communities themselves, including our friends and colleagues from interstate and overseas who are joining us today. I put the National Principles for Disaster Recovery up there because I think they provide such a wonderful framework for thinking about how we can do disasters that have community at the core. Can I have the next slide, please, Anthony? Thank you. So for those of you who are joining us from interstate and overseas, I know that map is not fantastic, but that's a map of the Greater Western Sydney region. Now, right in the far western corner, not where the ocean is, where the Pacific Ocean is, but the other corner is the Penrith LGA. So you get a sense of how far back from the coast Penrith is. Could I have the next slide, please, Anthony? Thank you. So you can see the little blue section there is Penrith, and you can see where our local region is connected up. We are basically all neighbours. So you've got the Blue Mountains, Hawkesbury and Lithgow local government areas. So we're very closely geographically connected. Also, our region, our local region, has been very significantly hit by cascading disaster events. So droughts, bushfires, floods, landslips, everything that comes with that. So I just wanted to give that context to you so you get a sense of where the community leaders that you'll be hearing from today are coming from. So we make the most of this opportunity to step outside your normal workday to meet with and hear from some of our local community leaders from the Lithgow, Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury local government areas. We know that local communities have a hell of a lot to offer to government and emergency management agencies. We also believe that the achievements and hard work undertaken by local communities is often invisible and deserves a much bigger platform, along with a mandated place at the emergency management table. Bridges of understanding and collaboration can and must be built. We invite you to be curious and to be open to hearing different ideas about how disaster resilience can be crafted from the community up, ideally with endorsement and support from partners in government and emergency services. We think you will come away with some fresh perspectives on what communities are capable of achieving. We want to acknowledge and validate your interest and commitment to finding better ways to manage disasters, which recognise and incorporate local community strengths, knowledge and experience. You are in the right place. Today is one step in what we hope will be many that help to build and establish respectful dialogue across all parts of society. We hope to see development of a shared understanding and consensus around how disasters can be managed in ways that produce just and fair outcomes for all. The project that I lead, Resilient Villages, has been walking alongside some of these local communities to scaffold and secure the steps that they are taking to organise and to take responsibility for preparing for future disasters. They know firsthand that government and emergency services cannot be everywhere and cannot provide everything. They know from lived experience that in reality, it often comes down to them and their neighbours. The Resilient Villages banner states, by the community, for the community. And this describes in reality the ambition, the intention and the work. We recognise that it literally takes a village to protect and strengthen a village, and we welcome you all as partners in this process. So that's my introduction. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to one of our webinar co-hosts, Chan, who is the Executive Officer of Local Community Services Association. And I'm just going to let you know a little bit more about Chan. So in previous roles, Chan has worked for the Upper Mountains Youth Services, St George Migrant Resource Centre, Blackheath Area Neighbourhood Centre, Mountains Community Resource Network, and for ANTAR New South Wales. That's Australians for Native Title and Reconciliation. Having gained experience in the community sector as a community development worker and project coordinator, Chan is committed to promoting the importance of small community-based not-for-profit organisations and the value of cross-cultural understanding and community engagement. Chan has a passion for challenging equity and social justice issues affecting our community and believes that neighbourhood centres play a vital role in our civic society through community management, their ability to facilitate cross-cultural understanding, and through engaging their community in shaping their future. Thank you, Chan. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you for the introduction, Anne, and welcome everyone. I wish to acknowledge that I'm on Gundungurran direct land. From Anne's introduction, you would have noticed that I have a long-standing connection to the Blue Mountains where I live, and when I work from home or remotely, then mostly that's where I am. I have a great deal of respect for the communities that you are representing here, mainly and namely our member organizations, the neighborhood community centers, but also the progress associations and locally organized community groups that have been absolutely essential in addressing the atrocities, the wash up, the preparedness for crisis before and if and when it arrives. So I have utmost respect for the work that you do. My respect goes to all elders, past, present, and emerging of all First Nations, wherever you are. And I extend that respect to First Nations people that are here with us today and those that are close to your heart. Just to give you a quick background to the LCSA, I will share a couple of slides. I won't take much time, but I thought it might be useful for you to get a sense as to who we are and what we do and why we are in this space of disaster management and what we see as one of the key issues. I hope that you will be able to see my slides. So for today's event, I've prepared a few slides. The acknowledgement of country is in writing because I think we never do it quite justice at the beginning of meetings, but I do acknowledge that it is and always will be Aboriginal land. The LCSA represents approximately 180 community organizations in New South Wales. So we are a member-based organization and we do advocacy work and capability building work that makes sure that our members can be the best version of themselves. We also form part of a national network, the Australian Neighbourhood Houses and Centres Association, with over 1,000 organizations across Australia. And yeah, look, there is more neighborhood centers in Australia than what there is McDonald's. So if there is one takeaway from today, I would say, remember that number. Whenever you see a McDonald's restaurant anywhere, there is a neighborhood center not far from there. And just to also tell you that we are part of a global movement, the International Federation of Settlements and Neighborhood Centers, the IFS, is a United Nations recognized NGO, which has seats around some of the key committees of the United Nations. And we are proudly hosting the office as of the 1st of January 2025 here in Sydney. So we are very intimately involved and have a leadership role in the international network. One of the key concepts that I would like you to engage with today, many of you probably are familiar with the term community development, but if you look at the end of the slides, we define community development as doing with community rather than doing for, or worse, doing to community. So the words with, for, and to are going to resonate throughout my slides and hopefully the conversations today, because true community development and community-led change can only happen if the community is at the center and at the heart of any initiative that matters to the community. And to that end, I want you to just think about this slide as a way of thinking about not just social services, but also the way that we actually show up on a daily basis to our work or to our community initiatives. And there are two significantly different mindsets. One is a welfare, a charity mindset, a benevolence mindset, which you see on the left-hand side, which is that doing for, or worse, doing to. And the other one is the doing with concept, the community development concept. And you will see that in the boxes underneath that the language changes significantly, whether or not you have a welfare or a benevolence mindset, or if you have a community development mindset. In community development, we will talk about the strengths of people, the interests, the assets. We treat people as citizens, as community members, and we drive our efforts through the engagement of community with a view of giving people empowerment, agency, self-determination, and it's all about giving people the tools, the resources, the capacity that they need to deal with their own issues as good as possible. So these are long-term, mid or long-term solutions that that have much more sustainability built into them. Whereas a welfare mindset looks at what is wrong, what is missing, what are the deficits, what are the needs. Government-funded programs often almost exclusively have a needs-based approach, and then we talk about clients and service delivery, and it is in worst-case scenario dependency creating. They are short-term fixes, and the focus is on relief rather than on building people's capacity to deal with their own issues. Now, I don't want to come across as saying that one is good and the other one is bad, or one is better than the other. But it is important to keep in mind that especially during disaster management, there is a strong tendency towards emergency relief, a strong tendency towards looking at what is wrong and what is missing. And in crisis, that is absolutely essential. But when we prepare for disasters, or when we recover from events that have impacted on our communities, in the end, it is community that actually sits there and will always be there long after the media and the funding has left the area. It is the community that actually has to drive the long-term rebuilding of the communities. And yeah, so there is an interaction between these two that is very important to understand. Just to wrap up on this point, there is the very commonly known fable that if a person goes hungry, give them a fish and they're not hungry anymore. But if you teach them how to fish, they will never go hungry again. And I think that is probably a demonstration, metaphorically speaking, of the relationship between these two. Of course, give a person a fish if they're hungry. But if you teach them how to fish, you give them agency to deal with the issues in the long term. So for now, I will stop there with my slides. I will come back to that at a later stage. But it is an absolute privilege for us to support resilient villages in this event, and really, just to say it again, I honor the work that local community groups are doing in Mount Irvine, in Mount Wilson, in Bell, Bilpin, McDonald Valley, and if I have missed any from the groups that are represented, Resilient Villages. You know who you are. We honor you, and I think that is true community development, true grassroots work that is in the end what makes communities sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chan. I know that your thoughts and what you shared is resonating with everybody here in the room, so thank you so much. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our other webinar co-host, Cara Varian, who is the CEO of New South Wales Council of Social Services. Before we bring Cara on, I'll just let you know a little bit more about who Cara is. So Cara is the Chief Executive Officer of NCOS and a strong advocate for equity, opportunity and dignity for all. NCOS is the peak body for the social services sector and the leading advocate for people and communities who are experiencing poverty and disadvantage in New South Wales. Prior to joining NCOS, Cara worked across the not-for-profit, public service, political and corporate sectors. She has experience in the military and at all three levels of government in Australia. Can we welcome Cara?
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here today. NCOS is very proud to be supporting this event. You can imagine that we have been engaged quite heavily in the tropical cyclone Alfred coordination in the last couple of days, so it seems especially relevant to me as I've tried to navigate some fairly tricky and sometimes unwelcome forums. I am joining you from Wongal country today. It's a beautiful part of the world with close to the water and lots of strong marine kind of winds that we deal with regularly. And it's a regular reminder to me about the importance of us showing respect to the land and our weather in the way that we live in our space and the way that we prepare for our future. I wanted to talk a little bit about NCOS and the way that we represent the social services sector in New South Wales. And we hope in doing so, I guess, dovetail into the work that's happening into local communities, as well as support that work. So I'll just go to the next slide. For those of you may not have heard of NCOS, we've been around for 90 years. It's our birthday this year. I'm really proud that we've been doing this work in New South Wales for this long. We're the oldest community council of social service in the country, but there is one in every state and territory, and we are part of that national network. We have a dual focus of poverty eradication and also support for the social service sector. And as you can imagine, that is very broad because the issues around poverty eradication and disadvantage touch almost every part of society and every part of government policy. So as much as possible, we try and achieve these two objectives through connection and support. So as an example, we've got 17 LGAs in New South Wales at the moment that are disaster affected, plus Lord Howe Island. And so we are working with members and communities in those LGAs to connect any issues that they can't resolve on the ground and escalate them into government as quickly as possible. We are known for our really strong research and policy. We like to make sure that what we're presenting to government is evidence-based and credible and represents a strengths-based approach to community development and support. One of the great things about being around for 90 years is that we stand on the shoulders of the many people in the social service sector from the years before us. And through that, we have an enormous amount of influence and awareness in Parliament. But interestingly, we have this ongoing kind of education requirement to remind people about the importance of putting equity in the centre of policy development and legislation development. So we try and make sure we're in every room that we can to reinforce that message every day. And we focus on the future, systemic change, and prevention. It is going to be no surprise to the people in this room that if we can look forward and we are involved early in people's lives to be part of what they want for their future, we will inevitably have a more resilient society and more resilient communities and households. We have 400 members across New South Wales, and our work is guided by the real experience of people facing poverty and disadvantage, and the community organisations that support them. We work closely with communities and partners to create credible evidence-based solutions, and we team up with pretty much anyone that will work with us, but it includes government, the private sector, and other stakeholders, because ultimately we're about affecting change and making a difference. I'll go to the next slide. There's some principles here around disaster resilience, which came from a report by the Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal. And it's a better summary than I could give you about the principles that we use when we approach disaster management and disaster resilience at NCOS. We know that community must be at the centre of disaster resilience, and they need to be seen as engaged, equal contributors. And I think that's one of the really interesting things in my process of being engaged in tropical cyclone Alfred. The community service sector was engaged through the National Emergency Management Authority's coordination meetings as part of industry. But we were really given an observation seat at the table rather than a contribution seat. And over the course of the last week, we've been able to carve out some more space, and that has been really helpful. But it's really kind of clear to me that job needs to continue to happen. And basically, we're being included at the moment on an on-request basis, and largely because of the relationships that we have in place. And I think we need to move from this environment into an environment where it is formally including the social service sector. So you can see the other principles that we use on the slide here. And you know, this is going to be reflected in all of the conversations that are happening today. I want to just kind of touch base around the work that NCOS is doing, because I know it will connect with so much of the work that you're doing. So I'll just go to the next slide. Our kind of primary work at the moment is through a project which we're calling the Community Organisation Disaster Adaptation Project. It's funded through the DRF funding, and it's using local knowledge and networks to build disaster resilience in communities. And so we're working with across 7 LGAs in 4 parts of New South Wales, and we're partnering with LCSA and ABSEC as the central governing group. But largely the projects that are being run in those communities are run by local providers, local social service organisations, and they're designed by them so that they are designing those programs with the community and then delivering them with community. And our role is really being able to put the framework in place to make sure that the evidence and the outcomes of those projects are being fed into government decision making and changing the way that government structures engage with the social service sector. It's really clear to me, we seem to be in a place at the moment that there is an acknowledgement that putting humans and communities at the centre of disaster management processes is important, but that the system hasn't worked out how to do that properly. And so being part of the conversation at all levels of government will help us influence that evolution. Those projects are being delivered in the Hawkesbury, LGA, Northern Rivers, and then Southern New South Wales, but across 7 LGAs across New South Wales. But the other things that are happening at NCOS is the representation of the sector, parliamentary inquiries that relate to disaster preparedness and response and recovery. We're also increasing our resources and investment in our policy and research team so that we can spend more of our time focused on resilience and disaster management. We are part of a national collaboration, and we're in the process now of applying for funding that will go across all the causes across the country to really try and almost show government how we can work across the whole nation, but by delivering the programs at a community level. So it's a tricky balance to try and make those levels work, but together. But if we don't practice it and get better at it, then we're not going to be able to evolve from where we are. The other thing that NCOS does, which I'll just go to the next slide, is play a coordination role and a support role for social service sector organisations. And so I encourage everyone on this call, when you've got some time, to go to our website. You can see here there are lots of tools to help social service organisations prepare and plan for disasters. And then we work with both the federal and the state government to keep all of the resources up to date so that people have a one-stop shop for where they can go for what to do after a disaster. So yeah, again, if you ever want to get in contact with NCOS about disaster preparedness or response, if we go to the next slide, you can see our contact details, but there is quite a lot of resources online as a starting point. And then we're always kind of open and interested in collaboration and working out what's the next best thing to do to make it work better for communities and give communities a greater stake in the way that the disaster management framework works in New South Wales. Thank you very much for your time and good luck. This is going to be a great conversation today.
Thank you so much, Cara. It's really fantastic to hear about the amazing advocacy work of NCOS. It's just really gratifying to know that NCOS has our backs. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so I'm very excited to introduce the next portion of our webinar, which is you get the opportunity to hear directly from local community leaders in our region who are doing this work on the ground. So I'll just let you know beforehand that each of the presenters that you're going to be hearing from will be speaking for 10 minutes each. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce our first presenter, Max Horn. And I'll just tell you a little bit more about Max before we bring Max on. So Max Horn is a resident of the Megalong Valley, which is located in the Blue Mountains local government area. He's a member of the RFS, former president of the Megalong Valley Community and Landowners Association, and actively supported the community push against the proposed heli-tourism venture at the Katoomba airfield. Right on, Max. As part of his involvement in the Megalong Association, he is engaged with local, state, and federal government representatives on various issues, including fires, roads, community building, and communications. One outcome of that engagement is the creation of the Bush Telegraph app. Can we welcome Max?
And audio. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Max.
Right. All right. So
welcome.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to present to everyone here. And I suppose I will apologise that I can't attend for the whole presentation, but I will be watching it later along with others from the NVCLA. We're going to be attending this, and if you have questions for me afterwards, please feel free to reach out. I'm sure that the Resilient Villages Anne hopefully would be able to pass on my contact details. I haven't put them in my presentation. So if I could ask for my presentation to be brought up on screen, or else I can do that. There we go. All right, great. So yes, I have been involved in the Megalong community for a number of years. We live on a farm here, and we've been involved in a bunch of different efforts to support the community. This app was something that we developed a number of years ago after the bushfires in 2019-20. There's an opportunity to put in for grants supporting the connection in the community, supporting community resilience. And this was one of the proposals that we put in for, and we were funded, and this is the outcome. So it is a system which I'll talk to a little bit further, but but I just want to draw your attention to the photo splashback of this cover page. The photo is of our road. We have one road into the valley, and this happened. This particular section was damaged a year ago and resulted in a couple of weeks of complete disconnect, inability to drive in and out of the valley. So that is just an example of the type of disasters that the valley has faced over time. So if I could go to the next slide, please. So who are we? The association is a volunteer-run organisation. We've experienced running projects over decades, from trivia nights to the Megalong Gymkhana, new ones more recently, the Megalong Makers Market, new community pizza oven installation, and the Bush Telegraph. They're actually all examples of efforts that address a fundamental objective of the association, which is to improve communication and connection within the community, because we believe that that is foundational to supporting resilience in the face of disasters. We collaborate with other local organisations in this, of course, the RFS, the Pony Club, Blackheath Area Neighbourhood Centre, as well as all levels of government. So if we could jump to the next slide, please. So what are we talking about? The Bush Telegraph. Now, you're probably aware of the Bush Telegraph, an informal network which spreads news through a region of rural or outback Australia. We thought that was a nice way of labelling the system that we built. It is an app that allows you and your community to share information about emergency incidents. The purpose of the Bush Telegraph is to support communication within communities like ours about incidents like road closures, tree falls, floods, etc. So it's set up such that if anyone posts an incident on the app, everyone else in the community gets a notice on their phone if they've got the app installed, including the map location, a short description, and a photo of the incident. And that is then there's additional functionality for discussion forum, for updates and so on. So the essence of it is it's crowdsourced information in real time, in effect, social media for a small community. It's designed with a privacy focus. It's storing and presenting only the minimum data that's required to support the functionality. So it's expressly not Facebook. There's certain people in the community who love Facebook and certain people in the community who refuse to be on it. So we wanted to have something that was a common denominator that everyone would feel comfortable using. So it's really designed to be community focused and community moderated as well, which is another important aspect of it. So if I could jump to the next page. So why did we do it? Well, as I mentioned, designed to increase communication and connection in our small community. We're a community of roughly 150 residents. We're dispersed over roughly 100 square kilometres. So we're really spread out. and communication is a challenge. The valley, however, is a major draw in the upper mountains for tourists visiting a cafe and restaurant, wineries, horse riding, camping, walking the 6-foot track. So we can have a lot of people visiting, more than the number of people who live here at any point in time easily, particularly over holiday weekends. We have one public road in and out. It's a lifeline in extreme. When we have this access cut, we need to rely on helicopter food drops. This happened in April, as I mentioned. It's also happened at different times. This photo I've got here is a landslide that happened about 4 years ago now, which coincided with another subsidence of a section of road that also had us cut off for over a week. And in these cases, we've got people trapped. It's important for people to know that they are trapped. So if there are other emergencies, they are able to then arrange so the response appropriately. If they need an ambulance, they can't get one. They need to call an ambulance, air ambulance, for instance. So we're exposed to road closures, particularly on the main road, but also in the network of smaller roads through the valley. And it can be, yes, critically important for people to learn and be able to plan around these issues. So, yes, if we could go to the next slide. The app that we've built is a mobile application. It's available for both Android and iOS. They're available on the respective app stores. There's also more information and access to a web portal at bushtelegraph.org. So if you're welcome to have a look at it there, go and download the app. I will mention that the app is designed to be used by local communities. It is therefore very limited in its functionality. So if you're in Sydney, or actually even if you're elsewhere in the mountains outside of currently a few areas in the valley, in the mountains where there is communities actually designated in the Bush Telegraph, then you won't be able to do much with the app. The definition of a community within the Bush Telegraph app is something that is a very simple thing that needs to be done, but it is a control that is put in to target the usage to communities that are appropriate. It wouldn't be appropriate for this to be used, say, in Sydney. It would get overwhelmed, but perhaps I can talk to that a little bit more. If I could go to the next. So here are a few screenshots. You've got the web portal. There's the middle screenshot of the phone app is a map view of incidents. So it's just showing the recent historical, this is an old screenshot, but the recent historical incidents, and you can click on an incident and see, okay, this incident is a fire, and then you can look at a different way, which is the right-hand view, which is a time sequential listing of the incidents that have happened. And if you click on any of those, then you can go in and get more information, including going into the discussion section. Now, I like data. This is just pulling, I've got a couple of charts in here showing the usage. So this is just the last couple of years. You can see that, well, what it's showing is the dates of, or the number of incidents posted by quarter, calendar quarter, over time, and they're separated by category. So in the app, you can, when you're posting an incident, you can say what sort of incident it is, whether it's a fire, a flood, road closure, tree fall, etc. There is another category. So I can't tell you much about that right now. Maybe I'll give you a bit more color on that. But what you can see is that there is obviously ebbs and flows in these sort of things that we had. We had one fire that was in the second quarter of 2023 through the other, well, the rest of the time there are no other fires, but there were There are several road closures, particularly in the second quarter of 2024, or these are postings, notices related to road closures. So that was when we had the very heavy rainfall and that road collapse that I showed you the photo on the first page. There are, when we have wet weather, we tend to have tree falls. And they're tree falls that block the road. That's what these are about, and people want to know about. But the other category can be all sorts of things. Just one example, because we're a rural community, we have animals on the road, and that can be a safety concern. So people notify the community about that. But yes, in third quarter of 2024, we had one tree fall, and so on. So there's just some fluctuation. If you could go to the next page, please. So this is the number of users who joined the platform over time. So when the platform started, we had a lot of users. And again, there's a discrimination between, I should say, administrators, platform administrators, users and guests. So the blue bars are the people who have registered as users, which gives a certain amount of additional functionality. Administrators and platform administrators are running the system and moderating the system, and guests are able to access the system and view incidents, but not able to post their own incidents. But what you see is that, yes, when the app was really started in early 23, we had a large spike in new users, and then obviously over time there've just been a relatively small number until 2024, when we did have that the road closure. We had 150 people trapped in the valley, and there was a lot of usage of the app, and so obviously more users. Now, if you could go to the next screen, I'm going to try and jump through this relatively quickly. Thanks. So how I should mention that we got the app set up with funding from the Bushfire Community Recovery and Resilience Fund. That was for the construction of the system, but then the ongoing costs are borne by the Megalong community. So if you could go to the next screen. My final slide, next steps. We designed this to support individuals in any small community like the Megalong. It comes at a modest cost. It's currently about $1,000 a year, which is an expense covered by the association or the community for maintaining the system. We can add new communities and users, and that adds a small amount of cost, but the system could be extended to support institutional access, say for local councils posting community alerts and receiving community information, but this would come at some development costs. So the questions are, do other communities want to take advantage of the system, and is there a possible funding model that could support its wider adoption?
Thank you so much, Max. Congratulations to you and MVCLA on creating such an amazing community resource. So thank you so much, Max. And I know how busy you've been, so we really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne. I really appreciate it. And likewise, thanks to everyone. Actually, one other point, Cara made the point, disaster resilience built from community at the centre. And I have to say that is very much my view. So thank you.
Thank you, Max. We all endorse that message. Thank you.
Cheers.
Now, because we're running a little bit over time, I'm not going to run through everybody's bios, but we will post them with the presenters and permission, so that you get to know a little bit more about our presenters. But right now, what I'll do is I'll go straight to our next presenters, who are Mark Twirl, who is the president of the Association of Bell, Clarence and Dargan, ABCD Inc. for short, and Karen Cody, who is the vice president of ABCD Inc. So let's welcome both Mark and Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you to MCRN for giving us an opportunity to speak to a much wider audience in terms of what our association's been doing. I'm Karen Cody, as Anne was saying, I'm vice president. I'll start speaking first, and then Mark Turrell, who is president of the association, will then finish off our talk. So we're here today to talk about what does community-led bushfire preparedness and recovery look like, particularly for a small community such as our own. Next slide, please. Right, and those are our funding agencies. Okay, so you can see that we're in an area of high bushfire risk. Just by way of background, we're on the western edge of the Blue Mountains, high up at 1,100 meters. We're surrounded by national parks and dense forest. And you can see some little lines scratched out in that huge territory of forests. Bell's line of road basically is running diagonally across the screen, and you'll see the small little villages of Bell, Dargan, and Clarence on it. If you go to the far left, the road, Bell's line of road, heads towards Lithgow. You go towards the far right, it's heading down to the east towards Sydney. There's also a small road coming off that's known as the Darling Causeway. On there, there's a bit of a sign that says Hartley Zone Substation. That basically leads to Mount Victoria and the rest of the Blue Mountains villages. Right, the next slide. In terms of our history, in December 2019, our 3 small villages, which have a population of just 330, were hit by the Gospers Mountain Fire, and then in the same day, the Mount Wilson backburn. And you can vaguely see Bell's line of road on that map, again extending diagonally across near the top of the map. And the villages of Clarence, Bell, and Dargan are all about to be impacted by the fire. And specifically, the issue here is that all our exit points are also either have already been hit and all the exits are closed off, or they're about to be. So I'll spare you the photos of the destruction, because what I really want to stress is that mixed in with our feelings of shock and grief, having been hit by 2 different fires through the day, we had this overwhelming sense of disillusionment and anger, because quite frankly, we felt abandoned by government. And our only way forward for us, our only positive way forward, was to actually take ownership of the situation. The problem was that we had no association, we had no staff, no funding, no communication mechanisms, no materials and equipment. We didn't even have tables and chairs. We didn't have policies, partners, and we didn't have a place of our own to even meet in. And in particular, we didn't have an agreed path forwards for the community. So what happened was that RFS volunteers stepped into that vacuum. And following 2 community meetings organized by local RFS volunteers, we were able to identify our broad priorities, and we created an overview of those priorities, or a community needs analysis. The problem was it took 1.5 years after the fires and then COVID before we were actually able to form the Association of Bell, Clarence, and Dargan Incorporated, and to elect our committee members. And our constitution, our objects, our vision, mission, all of that are available up on our website, which is abcdinc.org.au. This diagram is the community needs analysis overview that was generated, and you'll see that it's based on the prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery cycle. We assigned projects to each of those areas. The diagram was created specifically to explain on 1 page to the broader community, and in particular to outside agencies, what we were on about. We thought that a quick overview was going to be an essential tool in attracting support for us. And all of the projects that we're going to be speaking about today are on this overview. Next slide, please. An essential element of these bushfire preparedness projects was to ensure that the community could actually lead the development of a bushfire resilience action plan. First, though, we needed to make sure that we actually had the knowledge that was necessary to recognize, prioritize, and then address those bushfire risks. And only then would we be in a better position to tell government and emergency services and support agencies what we actually wanted. So we designed a suite of projects with that in mind. And importantly, by then we were able to access some funding, and we hired some independent bushfire consultants to run a series of training events. And we formalized partnerships through MOUs with two key groups, our local RFS Fire Brigade and the Mountains Community Resource Network Resilient Villages Project. Next slide, please. Next, yep. All right, so in all, we ran 27 community events on bushfire risk reduction. We had introductory training sessions that only lasted 3 hours, but then we had more comprehensive building and property bushfire assessments. We had 11 days of these, with 3 to 4 properties assessed on each day, and 5 to 20 participants per day. Perversely, it seemed that the worse the weather, the more people we had actually showing up on the day. We had an independent bushfire consultant come in and actually go to people's properties and talk to them about, you know, their shonky windows and how they could be fixed up, some low-cost solutions that could be put in place to help to address the risks associated with them. But importantly, he was able to give actually tailored responses to their particular problems. And the neighbors were there and other people from the community who could also ask questions and get real answers to what their issues were. And so there'd be a conversation around construction issues or vegetation management or vegetation legislation, and how do you, work with the existing vegetation legislation. He also spoke about what strategies we might take a look at in terms of improving our community's overall protection. And I think these particular sessions on people's properties, talking in the rain and through the sleet and the snow, were also extremely effective at building community cohesion, because neighbors got to meet each other. What happened after the fires? A lot of elderly residents moved out of the area, and we had all these new people coming in. They didn't know who their neighbors were. We have very large blocks. They'd never met them. And this provided an opportunity for neighbors to actually talk to each other, to get impartial expert advice on what risks they both faced and how to best address them. So it helped to build cooperation between neighbors, and also helped to build the ability to avoid potential conflict, to nip conflict in the bud when it came to understanding what actually needed to occur to reduce that risk. And the younger neighbors were often quite happy to help the elderly residents to address some of those risks. Now, based on those workshops, we had a 50-minute video developed about the lessons that were learned, and that video is available on our website. We also had a grand movie premiere and at our local cinema, and we had well over 100 attendees at that very fun event. We also had workshops on how to do pile burning and hazard reductions. And as well, the next slide, please. We had vulnerability assessments. Now, this consisted of person-centered emergency planning, or PCEP, which were particularly useful, we found, for elderly residents and also new residents when it came to thinking about what they were going to do if an evacuation was required. And it was Belong that ran those for us, and they did a great job. Once we had done these workshops and the community were well informed, we were then in a position to run the Resilience Action Plan Community Workshop. And at this workshop, the community identified and prioritized future actions that it wanted ABCD Inc. to take on to help reduce the risk from bushfire. So the community asked us to write, for example, to the RFS requesting a documented community protection plan that listed a hazard reduction schedule, the responsibilities of all land managers, the establishment of a series of fire trails, and importantly, neighborhood safer places for Clarence and Dargan. They also asked that we ask for representation on the bushfire management committees to ensure that their risks were understood and to be able to obtain confidence in the plan and transparency regarding the decisions affecting their safety. And we followed that up. We've also done community emergency mapping, and we have district maps of house locations, water sources, and vehicle access points, particularly for areas that in the last fires, the RFS out of area responders weren't able to find. And we're also piloting a community emergency communication system. Part of that is our SMS messaging service to log residents' evacuation status. We've got a UHF radio system, and our ABCD website has a page devoted to bushfire preparedness information, as well as we've got a quarterly newsletter that has articles on bushfire preparedness. So Mark's now going to talk further about our community emergency communication system and the bits of it that are really integral to the success of our communications activities.
Thanks, Karen. Good morning, everyone. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. As you can see, it's a bit of a mouthful. Community Emergency Communications System, or CECS. It's a questionnaire, and while I was going to go over some of the details, you could see that in front of you, questions 17 to 19. It was really useful from our perspective that we got specific information from people. It was really overwhelmingly taken up by people. So yeah, we were very encouraged, and also very strong messages of support. So I guess one of the things I'd recommend for community organisations is to reach out to your residents or your I guess stakeholders and ask them in print. Sometimes it's a ticker box type of thing, but in our case, as you can see there, quite specific information, and they were, very responsive. All of the respondents, of course, and they gave us really good information, especially if I might point out question 19. Where we asked for any skills or resources they could volunteer in an emergency or recovery situation. As you can see, arborists or electricians, plumbers, health workers, public servants, and we got a really, really good response. So yeah, highly recommend that for other community organisations to have a go at. Doesn't always go positive, but most of the time it does. All right, the next slide, please. All right, now this is one of our things that is taking up a lot of time at the moment, our community hall, or what we would like to call our resilience hub. And it will be, when it's finished, it's going through the final fit out at the moment and earthworks. It'll be the only large dry location our community has to come together. And remember, our community, as Karen showed in one of the earlier slides, it's elongated and takes almost 20 kilometres to cross from beginning to end. Now, at present, we are running all of our social events, our AGMs, our workshops, our markets, out of a range of temporary venues, including the RFS shed, semi-enclosed shelters, and sometimes even out in the open. And without putting too fine a point on it, remember, we are living at 1,100 metres above sea level, and it can get very cold, windy and wet up here. So yeah, it's one of the things that we would highly recommend is have a place-specific meeting point. So in the end, I guess, when it is completed and we're able to get our certificate of occupation, we believe our hall will contribute to social cohesion and especially our emergency response and recovery. But due to its BAL rating of 29, it's not a neighbourhood safer place. And for those who don't know what that means, it is not a safe location if bushfire rages. All right, if I could have the next slide. As you can see there with the dot points that are mentioned, even though it requires lots of extra work, we wanted to make sure the learning from this project and many activities that we do would enable governments at all levels, emergency services and NGOs to better help communities with future bushfire and other disaster emergencies. Excuse me. So we've done our best to provide reports and presentations where possible. In particular, with the help of MCRN, there will be a final report and recommendation on lessons learned in reducing bushfire risks and managing future emergency events. Okay, next steps, yep. We're conscious of the need to skill up our next generation of ABC committee members because like many other communities where I guess our average age is probably deep into the 50s, and we have community members that are in their 90s. So yeah, we're very keen to make sure that the next generation, the younger generation of committee members can be skilled up and ready to go and carry on our good work. Things like our processes, policies, projects, website, admin and database, and the policy context we are working in, we're determined to be in a better position for a community-led recovery after the next bushfires, which we know are inevitable. Hopefully not coming soon, but they'll be coming. We also want to consolidate our existing activities, such as finishing the hall's construction and continue some bushfire preparedness activities, but probably on a reduced scale. We want to continue our communications activities, of course, and social events to build our social cohesion. Now, lastly, if I may, we hope this presentation from Karen and I and the committee from ABCD Inc., we hope this presentation will have convinced at least some government agencies and NGOs that we're a credible, trustworthy organisation, representative of our community, and able to manage government funding with transparency and accountability. That we're here for the long term, we're keen to build on our history of achievement, and that we are serious and that you should be working with us because we sure want to work with you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mark and Karen, and I would echo your final message. And we've been very privileged and honoured to be able to walk alongside ABCD Inc. and the amazing work that you do. So thank you so much. So we're moving on to our next presenters, and can I just remind our wonderful presenters, if you can stick to time as much as possible. I know that's really difficult because you have a real passion for this work and you have much to share, but we have a lot to get through, so thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce our next speakers. So we have Lewis Adey, who works in the Community Emergency Response for McDonnell Valley Association, who are located in the Hawkesbury. And also we're going to hear from Siobhan Mahoney, who works in telecommunications, community telecommunications for the McDonnell Valley Association. Can we welcome both Siobhan and Lewis?
Hello. Are we going to see this? Wait for the slides to come on.
Lewis, just start talking and Anthony will bring your slides up.
Right. That's fine. I'll start talking. I need to talk to a picture. I don't know why. So my name's Lewis. I was one of the committee members running the Connected and Prepared subcommittee. The McDonnell Valley Association basically covers the areas of the McDonnell River, north of Wiseman's Ferry, and the Webbs Creek valleys. So the McDonald Valley and the Webbs Creek valleys. It's an area about 50 kilometers long and between 1 and 5 kilometers wide. So it's another one of these small population, but over a very large area. We're small and isolated with a population of about 465 permanent residents, maybe twice that with weekenders and tourists. Yet at our southern point at Wiseman's Ferry, we're only 100 kilometres from Sydney. However, our topography, this means that we have appalling communications and always have had. So at the beginning of this project, 2018, it started, there was no mobile coverage anywhere in the valley, and just the intermittent phone line that would go on and off for weeks. And connected to that, some people had ADSL, they were within a couple of k's of the exchange. Now, our exchange ran from a satellite connection with Wiseman's Ferry, and that would cut off as soon as there was a power cut. And being at the end of the power transmission lines, we also get very frequent power cuts. So we're used to having absolutely no communication in the valley, and also used to having frequent isolation events with flooding events every couple of years, not necessarily affecting homes, but certainly isolating us, cutting off our ferries and isolating us for periods of up to 2 weeks without power. Now, neighbours, the community has always been very resilient because of where we live, looking after each other, but in a very ad hoc way. People would walk or use canoes to check on their neighbours. There were lovely signals of towels being hung over balconies to communicate with neighbours to say if people were okay or not. But there was no other way of communicating or ever ringing 000 or even contacting SES. So our Connected and Prepared program is an extension of a development of a program commenced in 2018 called the Community Emergency Action Plan. And then in 2019, we received a small grant from Hawkesbury Council, which enabled us to undertake a survey of all residents. And this has resulted in a very detailed, secure database, which is continually updated, listing every property, areas of isolation, and particular residents' special needs. This has then informed the creation of sectors, subsectors of isolation, which ultimately has resulted in our wardens network of about 26 people. And then in early 2022, our project was significantly boosted with an award of a Australian Government Black Fire Recovery Grant, which was the objective was to build a more resilient and better equipped valley community to cope with the impact of emergencies and disasters. And this has helped the MVA being able to provide the following services to better connect and protect our community. First of all, the community water network, which I'll talk about in a minute. Maybe we can move down or to the next slide, sorry, and to the next slide. And to the next slide. Yeah, here we are. So the community water network, I think I've talked about all that. Perhaps we can move to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. Community water network, UHF radio network, emergency grab bags containing first aid kits, torches, radios, manual charging systems, V-sheets for helicopters, USB sticks for documents, and so forth. And then individual household emergency response plans. And we've also been able to fund 6 more defibrillators to add to the existing community defibrillator scheme up and down the valley. We've also been able to purchase a water cube and trailer for use by community. We're undertaking mapping, which you'll see in a minute, to map the whole valley with the help of council. We've also produced an app, a young resident has produced an app which is fantastic. It links to council apps, links to river heights, links to flood information, and so forth. So that's been a nice, useful thing as well. And we've got signage up and down the valley indicating the channel for the UHF network. So this is now shows the extent of the valley, and it shows the 5-6 subsectors, and within each subsector there's about sorry, within each sector, there's about 5, 6 subsectors, each controlled by a warden. So there's 25 wardens that cover the entire valley and Webbs Creek. Wardens are permanent residents who voluntarily look out for their immediate neighbours in their subsector. This might include checking on and supporting their physical welfare, mental well-being, and guiding them to solutions as required. Wardens are not emergency responders or support workers, but are there to provide information and direct neighbours to information sources and emergency services. All wardens are connected through a WhatsApp network that includes the SES and the OFS. So this has really proved, when we've had power and internet, this has really proved invaluable on a number of occasions to share information to get help to people fast in emergency situations like ambulances and so forth. And then during power and network outages, wardens connect via high power base stations to which form part of the valley-wide UHF network. So during an isolation event, rather than hundreds of people trying to contact the SES, the warden becomes the conduit for messages to neighbours within their subsector who may be isolated, and they become the conduit to the RFS and to the SES and to outside agencies through the UHF network. So we've provided a UHF, bright orange UHF radio to every single household in the valley. These have become an invaluable communication tool during emergency events such as telecommunication failures throughout the valley areas. We've seen them in use already since the major floods, but we've seen them in use all the time in terms of relaying of messages when phone lines have been out in parts of the valley, sharing information and getting help to people fast in emergency situations, safety at home, in terms of taking it out on a ride-on mower or something to communicate if you have an accident, because with no mobile coverage. And then promoting UHF Channel 9 to the SES to contact people locally in flood activities. So it's just much easier to find where people are located during fires and floods when you're talking directly with that person. And then the network's been supplemented by 25 static base stations in each warden's house, which are just higher power radios, including the 4 local fire ships of Lower Macdonald, 2 in Lower Macdonald, St Albans and Wiseman's Ferry. To link the network across the entire length and breadth of the valley, because of its strange topography, we still had to install a number of repeaters and relays as well as the base stations. One more is about to come online to link the Macdonald Valley to Webbs Creek. And then this, after extensive testing and adjustment, it has now been possible to communicate up and down and across the valley from the furthest inhabited points north to Wiseman's Ferry RFS station, which is where the SES are located during an emergency, and further south. So that's it for me. I'll pass over to Siobhan.
Thanks, Lewis. So yeah, like all of you, I think in regional and peri-urban communities, rural communities like ours, we face a constant struggle with telecommunications, poor telecommunications. But things are improving slowly. Having access to LEOs or low Earth satellites such as Starlink has been a game changer for us. So we set up a subcommittee really to focus on trying to improve this. Our goal, which is very long, hard road, but we're really trying to get at least 90% of the Macdonald Valley with mobile coverage. Next slide, please. So the type of activities that we're undertaking to try and improve this situation include becoming a member of ACAN. And if any of you are in the same situation, I would strongly recommend you joining this organization. For non-for-profit organizations, it doesn't cost very much money at all, but they have been really good in helping us navigate what is quite a complicated environment with lots of different parties involved at different levels. But they've alerted us to various reviews, enabled us to make submissions to these reviews, and really just trying to highlight, the woeful situation we have in the Valley with communications. So it's just been a constant lobbying at all levels of government, federal, state, and our local council. And as a result of that, and thanks to ACAN, Lewis and I have been on the television. We've been on Current Affair. We've been in articles in The Guardian and all kinds of other papers, but really taking any opportunity to get our voice heard and trying to address this situation, because I don't think any of us want to be reliant on an unregulated service like Starlink. Next slide, please. So things are improving, albeit very slowly. As a result of the Black Summer Bushfire Grant, the Hawkesbury Council was awarded $4 million to improve mobile coverage in their council region. And we were very, very fortunate to have 4 sites allocated in the Valley. Unfortunately, I'm very sad to say that as of today, we only have 1 site live, and that's in the village. Sorry, we have an old site, which I'll come to later, but the only one that's really working well is in the village. It's a 4G small cell satellite. Its range is only 200 meters according to Telstra, but we have actually got range to about 2 kilometers around the valley. But because of the terrain, obviously, it's limited to just a handful of people who've got line of sight of this. We do have a very old small cell at our school, which has been upgraded or is in the process of being upgraded to a larger macro tower. But unfortunately, that's not live yet. Not sure why. Waiting to hear back from Telstra, but we're hoping that's going to improve things. And then we've got 2 further sites that are being considered further up the valley. Optus was awarded a grant back in 2016, but nothing's ever happened. So, it is a battle. We have to keep on top of these things. And, I think telecommunications is a vital infrastructure these days that every Australian has a right to. And I don't think, listening to all your stories, I feel like we're often discriminated against because of where we live. So we're continuing to fight that battle. So thank you all very much for your attention. Contact us if you have any questions about our Connected and Prepared programme, or if there's anything we can help you with, such as ACAN or some of the submissions that we've made. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Siobhan and Lewis. And I think we all collectively take our hats off to you for your persistence and your commitment and dedication to improving the resilience for the McDonald Valley communities and beyond. So thank you so much for that. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our final presenter, and that is the wonderful Alan Hyde from Mount Irvine Progress Association and Rainforest Conservancy. So let's welcome Alan. Thank you. Okay, we're getting there. Probably just setting up things in the background. And thanks everybody for all of your posts as well, which are coming up. Lots of thumbs up and lots of words like wonderful and amazing. Keep them coming. How are we going there, Anthony, with Alan's presentation?
I can start talking anyway, Anne, if you like.
Yeah, I think you're good to go, Alan. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anne and team, for inviting me to talk today. I'm president of Mount Irvin Progress Association, and like the others, we were hit by the fires in 2019, 2020. The fire that hit Mount Irvin was the Mount Wilson backburn. We fortunately didn't suffer from the Gospers mountain fire. We're a very small community. I'll show you a slide of that in a moment. Our population is currently only 8 people, 8 full-time residents, although we do have about 40 properties at Mount Irvin. So we are small, and part of the consequence of that is that we have great difficulty getting the necessary attention from people that we would like to get, even though we try. I'd like today to talk about the Rainforest Conservancy, the concept of the community protection zone that I've been working on and the community has been working on, and the development of the Mount Irvin Resilient Action Plan. This has occupied a great deal of time in the last 3 or 4 years and continues to do so, but they're all passionate topics. So perhaps if we could have the first slide, which is the Mount Irvin map. So this is Mount Irvin. We're in the very far corner of the Blue Mountains local government area. You can't get any further northwest than what we are. We're connected to the Bells line of road by a single road in and a single road out, which is approximately 20 kilometres long. We used to have a road to Bilpin, but unfortunately, due to landslides, that has ceased to be an access, and it's unlikely to be restored. So we can become very isolated, and when we are isolated, we've got to be totally self-reliant, and that's what we're planning to do, to be totally self-reliant. We can't be helped necessarily by helicopters, etc., because of mist. If I look out my window now, there's still a lot of mist hanging around Mount Irvin today. The past week has been extremely misty. So with the combination of bushfires and mist and bad weather, it's very difficult to get help from outside. Before I've got this map coming up in a later slide, so I think that we should move straight on to the Rainforest Conservancy. And we had a video produced with the help of the Blue Mountain City Council, and I thank them for that. I think it tells the history, some of the history of Mount Irvin, some of the history of the Rainforest Conservancy, and I think it's just about to start.
Growing up on Mount Irvin, my grandmother shared stories of walking into the rainforest on warm summer nights with her siblings to see the fireflies. This is one of my most precious childhood memories too. In 1897, surveyor Charles Scrivener surveyed the mountain, and recognising its rainforest, he recommended the area become a national reserve. This didn't happen. Instead, the land was purchased by 3 men, one of whom was my grandfather. The timber they cleared was used to build the wharves of Sydney Harbour. In December of 2019, there were no fireflies. Where they once lived amongst the ferns with the song of birds and insects, there was now silence. Nothing. One night, working as a volunteer for the Rural Fire Service, my hair caught on fire up to the level of my helmet. The bush was burning all around, and all I could smell was my burnt hair. My dad, Alan Hyde, came and took over my place that night. As summer moved into autumn in 2020, my hair grew back, but the rainforest didn't. There remained white ash and quiet. More than 1/3 of New South Wales rainforests were hit by these catastrophic bushfires. One evening, as we were sitting as a family, my dad said, "We can't let this happen again. We need to protect the rainforests, and the rainforests will protect us." Today, the Rainforest Conservancy is working together for the rainforests of the Blue Mountains, and that's just the beginning. We are working with local landowners who are returning their land that was once cleared to become rainforest again, creating corridors for wildlife. We are collecting and growing local rainforest seeds, and we are revegetating our creek lines and bringing moisture back to the bush. In my home, I hope to see the precious glow of fireflies again.
If we could go to the second map of Mount Irvine. So this is a continuation. One of the things after we decided to form the Rainforest Conservancy and start working on it, we had to look at how to protect Mount Irvine, and particularly the remnant rainforest, because we now are only talking about remnant rainforest and in patches. There's very little continuity. So one of the concepts I came up with, which is the second item I wanted to discuss, was the concept of the community protection zone. Now this is building on the APZ philosophy, which we are all aware of, or most of us would be aware of, to protect particular assets. So in looking at this and talking to local residents and getting their input, we realised that it was actually much better to have a holistic plan for the whole mountain rather than plans for each individual property. Now we can do this relatively easily because we are one mountaintop and we don't have communities scattered over various locations, but that doesn't mean that this philosophy couldn't be applied to other locations. So the concept was to build a ring around Mount Irvine, and I mean engineer a community protection zone. And it would comprise various elements. One would be existing infrastructure, existing natural features such as rock outcrops, etc. Particularly the rainforest, because the rainforest is a great store of water and moisture. And one thing that Mount Irvine does have is a lot of rain. We average about 1,400 mil a year. Sometimes it's up to 1,600 and 1,800. So we do have a lot of rain. That affords us to do things here that might not be possible to do elsewhere in terms of restoring the rainforest. So the first thing we had to do was to protect the rainforest and then develop it so that it offered us more protection. And the community, I'm pleased to say, is well and truly behind this project. Now, from protecting the rainforest and extending its protection, the concept of the community protection zone evolved. And on this diagram, you can see RF, this is my just crude diagram of what we've done. RF is rainforest, so you can see the very northern end is rainforest. It's hardly ever burnt. Following around clockwise, we've got wet sclerophyll and rainforest, so that's tall eucalyptus trees with rainforest understory. That continues along the whole eastern border of Mount Irvine, incorporating the Hall. Now the Hall is a neighbourhood safer place and it has an APZ surrounding it, which is regularly maintained. Moving a bit further on to the southern end of the mountain, I've put CP in that little diagram there, and that is cleared paddocks. So if you have a look at this map of Mount Irvine overall, you can see a lot of white space, and that white space is cleared paddocks. Then following it around, we've got further wet sclerophyll and rainforest. And then our most vulnerable area is to the west, which is cleared, well, we've got to use cleared paddocks and hopefully one day open woodland. So to achieve that open woodland, that's mainly at the moment wet and dry sclerophyll forest with some mixed understory. That needs the cooperation of people like the National Parks and Wildlife Service to enable us to implement that strategy at that point. Then inside that outer ring, there's obviously an inner ring, which is the cleared paddocks. Now, unfortunately, some properties are in that just beyond that outer ring, so we have to have a strategy for them. So the plan is to combine all of the protective mechanisms for all of the houses, their individual APZs, if you like, with this philosophy to create a total Mount Irvin protection zone. And we need to do this so as it's passive. We cannot rely on people getting to us. There has been instances in our past that the RFS hasn't been able to reach us. Our single road, which you can see to Mount Wilson down in the bottom right-hand corner, that has been blocked, and it gets blocked on many occasions. In the last fires, for the cleanup period, we were not able to leave Mount Irvin during the day for 3 weeks. We regularly lose power, and like other places that have been mentioned today, our telecommunications are woeful. So we have to be self-supportive, and we have to plan to be able to look after ourselves for some time. I might also mention, like the Megalong Valley, there is a potential major slip area on that road to Mount Wilson. So if that does slip, I'm not quite sure what we do apart from being self-resilient. So that's the concept of the community protection zone. I've offered to resilient villages to include a copy of the paper that I've written on that on their website, or even send it to people. Now, out of this also comes the development of the Mount Irvin Resilient Action Plan, and we've been working with resilient villages on that. It's still a work in progress. Our approach has been very similar to other communities. I think the major thing that we have been doing is conducting a number of open discussions with the community, where myself and other people who have done a lot of the planning don't put forward their thoughts first, which can tend to influence what responses you get. So these are very much like when you do a marketing exercise, for a new product, you just show them the product and you get the feedback, and you tabulate those thoughts from the people who have been in that session. Well, it's much the same. So out of that process, things come out which are of concern to the community, which we wouldn't normally think of necessarily. And that's been a very productive way. Now, once we have that information, we can then document that into our Mount Irvin Resilient Action Plan. So they're the 3 main things that I've been working on, and the community has been working on. A lot of the other challenges that the other people have mentioned, we face all of those as well. That's a very quick summary of what I've been up to since the 2019-2025s. And I think the story of the Rainforest Conservancy, even though it came out of a pretty bad situation, is one of great hope, and it's a positive story. And people have really bought into that concept.
It is most definitely, Alan. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I can let you know in the chat after the video was played, the commentary was beautiful. I'm crying now. Thumbs up. So congratulations on creating such a beautiful piece of work there. Thank you, Alan. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay. So everybody, we're now moving to the panel discussion session in our webinar. So what we will be doing is I'm going to be running through some specific questions or talking points that I will take to the panel. to get their thoughts and responses. And then what we will do is we'll spend about 10 minutes opening up to questions from you, the audience. So once again, I'm going to introduce our panelists, some of those who you've already met before because they were presenting earlier, but some that you haven't met yet. So obviously we have Karen Cody. We also have, where are we? Where's my list? It was all going so well. So we've got Karen Cody from ABCD Inc. and also Kathy McNamara, who is also a member of Association of Bell, Clarence and Dargan. So she's joining us here as well. Can I also welcome Rosie from the McDonald Valley Association, and she is Rosie Scott. She is the president of MBA, so she's joining us on the panel. Thank you, Rosie. Also Alan Hyde, who you just heard from, which is fantastic. We also have Chris Newton, who is the Executive Officer of MCRN. You've heard that acronym bandied about a bit. So that's Mountains Community Resource Network. And MCRN is the local peak for the community sector in the Blue Mountains. We also have Brett Henderson. Now, Brett has been was a member of the New South Wales Police Force for over 35 years. And during that time, he also was an emergency operations controller. And he's just finished his doctoral dissertation, I believe. Congratulations, Brett, which addresses community participation in emergency management. Now, I hope I haven't forgotten anybody on the panel. Yes, we've got Brett, Chris, Alan, Kathy and Karen. So let's get started. So I'm going to throw this question to perhaps the community leaders themselves could answer this one first. So just cutting right to the chase, what are some important messages and lessons that emergency managers and government can take from local communities? What are the key messages that they need to hear? So anybody from our local community associations and groups. You might have to unmute yourself if you're going to respond.
Yes, I'm happy to respond, Anne.
Thank you, Rosie.
The key messages I believe they need to hear is to communicate with us on a regular basis. And that is both before, so in preparation, also during, and also after the event. And to provide support, both physical, so manpower, or woman power, whichever, and also financial support. We need both.
Great, thank you. Karen, you had your hand up?
Yes, I think that what needs to be realized is that local community organizations can do what large outside agencies can't do, right? So we have legitimacy and trust within our community, and we've got local skills and assets that can be called upon during emergency responses and recovery. We know who the vulnerable individuals are in our local communities. We know who needs to have a look in to see how they're going, whether they've already evacuated or not. And well, from these presentations, a lot of us have really robust communication systems in place that can be called upon in emergencies. And we've got a much higher reach and participation rate, if you want to use government language, in terms of our communication tools. So why not talk to us and use those tools with us? We had the RFS, for example, the local RFS saying to us that they'd never seen so many residents show up for bushfire preparedness activities, that their annual activities, they usually get 2 people. I think their biggest total was about 3 or 4, you know, and they'd be coming to our events as well. And they were really quite impressed with how well they were going. And in some instances, I actually heard them say they were leaving it up to us because we were doing such a good job. So the other thing is that we've got a holistic view of what the problem is, and we can see it from our perspective in terms of what could be done better, what needs to change. really importantly, we can harness the goodwill that's out there in our community. We can do things for a lot cheaper, a lot more effectiveness, a lot more appropriately than outside agencies coming in with their usual menu of activities that they offer, you know, the same menu of activities in every community that they go to. And the other thing is we're actually really accountable. The local community know where we live. They will tell us if they are annoyed with us, and they do. And so, you know, we don't have to drown in bureaucracy, for example, in terms of getting things done. We can get them done really quickly if need be. So there's a lot of benefit to actually working with us and using those strengths in terms of getting this bigger outcome.
Yeah, great points, Karen. Alan, did you have something that you wanted to share in relation to that?
I support everything that's just been said, and the key to, from my perspective, is the bringing the community with you and encouraging elements of the community to actually lead some of these activities, so that there's real ownership at the community level. We would not be able to do what we're achieving at Mount Irvin without that ownership and the desire to make things happen. And they see the long-term view that, you know, something has to change, and we want to make it change, and we're the agents for change, if you like. No one's going to change it for us. We have to act.
Yeah, so it's very much kind of local agency and local control.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. Chris, you've got your hand up.
Let Kathy go next.
Oh, yep. Kathy, do you have some thoughts you'd like to share?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Anne. There's a groundswell of views throughout every agency, in grants, in coronial inquiries after disasters, that recovery should be community-led, and yet it doesn't seem to get to that next stage sometimes of actually listening to the community as to what they need. And communities do know what they need, and as the previous speakers have said, we know what to do, we can do it, and I think there just needs to be that next step of the trust of following through with that belief that community-led is the way to go.
Great points, Kathy. Thank you. Chris, you had some thoughts you wanted to share?
Yeah, so to just build on, I absolutely agree with everything that's just been said. But in partnership with that partnership between government and other agencies and local communities who are doing the work at the grassroots needs to be resourced. People are exhausted. They've just been through a disaster, and years, we know it takes 10 plus years for most people to recover from, you know, serious impacts, whether trauma or other. They need support to set up an incorporated association. This is not an easy thing to do on your own, as people present on this forum will know. They need admin support. They need some resourcing to support travel and communications and buying the paper and the printer cartridge and, you know, little things. It's not a lot of money, but this needs to be not ad hoc, short term. We'll throw you a couple of grand here or there. You're having to scrabble together small grants from, say, local council, or if you're lucky, big, you know, Black Summer bushfire grants. That's not a sustainable model for the future. So I absolutely agree with everything that everyone said, but along with that needs to go some trust from agencies and government agencies around letting local organisations get on with it, letting grassroots groups do their work, but also supporting them in a wide variety of ways. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Brett, you've got your hand up.
I've just been listening about all of that, and just one quick point that I really want to get across is that the social cohesion that takes place in that recovery phase is exacerbated in that phase because of everything that's taking place. But community groups can also be used in the earlier phases, because they already have the connection. They already have the ability to be able to perform certain functions that outside agencies can't. And therefore, that preparation phase becomes so significant for community organisations. So they work across the whole ambit. The PPR model, they just work totally across the whole ambit. And whilst the focus sometimes is on recovery, the focus, as we know, should be on that preparation and prevention phase, which has come out today. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brett. Just in relation to what we're talking about and what everybody has highlighted so well, it seems that what we need to be looking at is how to build better collaboration and working relationships between community, government and the emergency management sector. Does anybody have any thoughts or ideas around how that might happen? Alan, do you have some thoughts around that?
Well, I'll be quite honest. I think that resilient villages could play a major role in that, and it's a crying shame that your time is winding up. I just don't understand it. You've facilitated this, you've done other things for us. No one else has really helped us apart from the council. We have a very strong relationship with the RFS. I'm training to be a group captain in the RFS. Everything we do is with them. So that side of it's okay, but there's the rest of government that we struggle with. And it's virtually impossible for us to get a grant. I mean, I've been told, without repeating myself, I've put in applications and we're just told that you're too small. You know, you just don't warrant spending this money on, which is a bit disheartening at times. But we need a peak body, if you like, to represent us, but represent us at a local area as well. It's got to be representing, you know, the people of this part of the mountains in particular, or the Hawkesbury, or the Macquarie Valley, etc. Rather than someone in Martin Place or in Pitt Street, wherever the government's located these days.
Yeah. So perhaps, you know, we may get a response to that from LCSA and NCOS, and I know that, you know, a big part of their role is to advocate. So yeah, thank you, Alan, for sharing those thoughts. What about for others? Karen, Kathy, Rosie, in your experience, what do you think could potentially help to build better collaboration and working relationships between community and government and emergency management? Kathy?
I think one of the big challenges we weren't organised when we had the disaster. And I would encourage all communities to have a local association before a disaster hits your community, because then you've got a starting point. Certainly after the fire, we didn't know our neighbours and we couldn't access any grants. We were one of the most impacted communities in the 2019 bushfires with our loss of homes, and yet nobody was coming to us to help us, and we had to help ourselves. And it was so hard because we couldn't. And I think if next time a disaster comes, we're up and ready to go. We know how to do it. But until your community's been through that, it's really hard to know that to access grants, you need to be an association. To be an association, to get an ABN, you have to have governance and policies in place. And you've got to put all your communication things in place. So, and it's relying on volunteers that not only do they burn out really quickly, they're trying to actually recover from their own trauma and loss as well. So I think a message to communities to be organised before your disaster and know your neighbours and have an association so that you kind of know how it works. And then agencies that can help us know about us, hopefully.
Yeah, so I guess it's sort of part of the preparation piece, yeah, to kind of come together collectively, get agreement on what, you know, what the vulnerabilities are for the community and how you might address that. Thanks, Kathy. Rosie, did you have any thoughts about?
Yes, just to go on what Kathy's said there, we have many years ago formed an association, and therefore we do have very good communication with our local council, Hawkesbury, and also with state and federal government representatives. So we are constantly in touch with these people. We are reminding them the whole time of our presence and our requirements, and we have excellent relationships with them all, and we are getting responses. So, but you are right, Kathy, you definitely have to have that organised association. But it is a worthwhile thing to go through, I could assure you.
Great points, Rosie. Thank you. And Karen. You're on mute, Karen.
Oops. I've just got a question. So let's say you are well organized, you've got your association up and running, you have all your communication activities in place, your governance mechanisms are wonderful, financial accountability is wonderful, you run a whole bunch of disaster preparedness projects, but the emergency management sector really doesn't want to talk to you. And I think that is a problem. So what's required in terms of actually being able to make that happen? That's my real question, because we found we weren't really met with a receptive audience when we were writing to the RFS and asking to have a good quality community protection plan put in place. And we were not met with a receptive audience when we asked about having some representation on bushfire management committees, etc. Obviously, we have a big problem with fire, and we just want to make sure that we have the opportunity to provide some input in terms of the arrangements that are put in place for planning and for the response. And I have to be honest, and I can't say that we have been successful in that space.
Yeah, I hear you, Karen. There's a lot of frustration around that. So I might then ask for a response from Brett and from Chris in relation to, what could potentially make the difference in terms of creating and sustaining better working relationships between communities on the ground and government and emergency management. Brett, you've got your hand up.
I suppose one of the things that has interested me is this whole concept about engagement that is often touted as being the pinnacle of what can be provided to communities or community groups from combat agencies or emergency service organisations, which is found and found across a whole range of inquiries and research to just not be successful at all. So having knowledge of that, there's clearly a pathway here to actually do something. And I just take on board what Karen has said, and you probably already know my opinions on this, is that this actually needs to be legislated. And then there needs to be in place a level of governance that comes in over the top to ensure that it's being carried into effect. Now, we're not in New South Wales. We don't have that form of legislation to enable a shared responsibility, which is the requirement both internationally and nationally. We just don't have the legislation to be able to do that. A couple of states do within the Commonwealth, and they are progressing forward with a community participative role in emergency management. But we're sitting idle, I would suggest, and not doing much. As Karen has indicated, you see a lot of good work being done here today in community builds, but where does it go if someone turns around and says, we don't want to link with you, which is Aldrich's approach. We don't want to link with you, so we'll just do what we want to do. It needs that participation from the community, and if it can't be given voluntarily, well, then it has to come from a legislative component.
Yep, I hear you, Brett. Thank you. Chris, did you have a comment to make?
Yeah, I think the issue here for me is that we need to change the paradigm, the way we think about the whole preparedness, response, recovery continuum. You know, currently in New South Wales, at least, some other states have expanded slightly beyond the traditional paradigm. But in New South Wales, we do seem to be still stuck in the top-down approach with combat agencies in charge of that whole spectrum of PPRR. And you know, my view from being involved in this community response since 2013 here, and 8 disasters later, is that we are expecting too much of our combat agencies to have the skill set that Jean was demonstrating in his slides earlier of community development. The current model is still in the we do it to you. If you're lucky, it might be we'll do it for you, not how can we help you do what you know needs to be done at the local level, the grassroots up. And from my perspective, that's where the disconnect is, both in terms of engagement from our emergency services, resourcing of local community associations, trust in local community associations and groups to get on with doing the things that they need doing. We're still spending, what is it, 80% of the money on, well, now, you know, ex-tropical cyclone Alfred, for example, and the cleanup and the whatever, and billions of dollars will go into that. What we're not doing is the work on the ground that you folk have all just demonstrated, that prepares communities better to deal with whatever the next one is that's coming. And I think that's the disconnect. We need to flip, at least if we're going to have shared responsibility, let's have shared resourcing to allow communities to do this on the ground, would be my comment. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Chris. Kathy, you've got your hand up.
Just to acknowledge what Chris said there about the resourcing, from a cost perspective, it would be money so much better spent, because the wastage that we have seen with people that have, or groups, organisations that have got money, and we can do this for you, but it's not what we need, and that money is just wasted. So if the government and the powers that be want to look at their bottom line about the best way to spend the dollars, it's finding out what communities want. It's a financially sensible decision for them too, surely.
Yeah, absolutely, Kathy. It makes lots of financial and other sense. So before I read through some of the questions that have come from the audience, I just want to share something with you that came through on LinkedIn this morning from Ellie Bird for your comments and response. So Ellie Bird is the Chief Executive Officer of Resilient Lismore, and this is what she wrote. Right now, organisations across the Northern Rivers are scrambling for a tiny sliver of the disaster risk reduction funding pie, which isn't designed for community organisations. So today, Ellie, I'm calling on our governments at both state and federal level to do 3 things. 1, give us an extension for our DRF applications and make the next round more suited to community organisations. 2, secondly, extend recovery timeframes beyond 2 years. The horizon is no longer fit for purpose. And 3, most important, value the work that we do and resource us in ways that address the systemic inequity of current resilience funding. Can I just get some quick commentary? Rosie, do you have a response to what Ellie posted this morning?
Yes, I would agree. I applaud what she has written to us, and would support certainly her comments there, and they need to be acted upon. I'm sure she will make sure they are.
Yeah, she's a force for good.
Yeah.
Alan, do you have a response to Ellie's statement this morning, from this morning?
No, I think I support everything that has been said, and it's such a marvellous thing to see that these communities are doing the fantastic job that they're doing. I'm overwhelmed by it all. I wish we could all get together somehow and and compare notes.
Well, Alan, absolutely. Today is a start, right?
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
start with our region and we grow out from there. What about Kathy and Karen? Do you have any response to what Ellie posted this morning?
Oh, yes. Look, it's just so obvious. If you've been in our circumstances, it's so obvious. Particularly this aspect about the short-term funding arrangements. You know, we're tired, we're exhausted just in terms of getting all these activities up in place and running, and part of the problem is first is getting through the grant application stage, and then we're notified later on. Often there's delays in notification, and then we're in a real rush to get all the projects up and out the door, and then it's time for the next grant applications. It's just, it doesn't contribute to good planning, that's for sure.
Yeah. Kathy?
All of those activities are done by volunteers in their own time. There's no funding to help people to help themselves. You just have to do it by yourself. And it's why community groups burn out so quickly, because we are working so hard. But we're also a determined bunch. So we're not going to stop, even though we're burnt out, we're not going to stop because it's too important. And people like Ellie putting these things forward is so important. So absolutely support what she said. And I'm just waiting for the latest disaster that's happened up north with the cyclone. There's going to be an inquiry after it as to how we can do things better, because there's an inquiry after every disaster, and it's time that the inquiries were listened to, surely.
Yes, absolutely. And Chris, your comments.
So to follow on from all of that, Resilient Villages funding from the DRF round 1 or equivalent is due to finish on the 31st of March, and our project will have to wind up. I'm determined to, Kathy. I'm not giving up. I'm putting in another grant application. We didn't get successful the last time round, but hopefully this time we'll be successful to continue the work that RV is doing until, in my view, it's a stopgap, until government accepts Ellie's 3 recommendations and stops this ad hoc, short-term, competitive rounds of funding for preparation and resilience work. So, yeah.
Good point, Chris. And Brett, do you have a comment to make?
Yeah,
and then
look,
I'll come back to you, Kathy.
Just really quickly, I think the Colvin Review just recently said that it's about 87% of the funding from the Commonwealth goes into this recovery phase, but they've forgotten about the other bit, which is what Chris has just spoken about. This is the preparation phase. So instead of using the money in that recovery phase, it needs to be used, as everybody has discussed, for at least the last 15 to 20 years, if not before. It needs to be used up front in this preparation, prevention area, so that we don't have to do this response activity that should just really be a risk management strategy when everything goes pear-shaped. So it needs to be up front and not down the back end.
Great point, Brett. Absolutely. I'll just take your comment, Kathy, as the last one before we then address questions from the audience.
Brett just kind of said exactly what I was going to say.
Cool. Did you want to elaborate on that?
Well, only that, and something that Chris said too about competing for grants. It's like money's thrown into a pool and everybody has to jump in and fight for it. And sometimes the strongest people getting that money aren't the people that know what to do with that money. And it's just the wrong way of doing it. And the thing with Resilient Villages, they actually listened to what we needed and helped us fund some of the things that we needed, as opposed to some other groups that came in and said, oh, well, we managed to jump into that pool and grab some money. And we were thinking that you might like this, and we didn't. So that money just was wasted.
Okay. Sorry to hear that, Kathy. Thank you. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I've been emailed some questions. So I'm going to bring those up now and read through those and invite responses from our esteemed panelists. Okay. Oh, where did it go? Come back. Okay. So I have a question from Andrew Hewson from Penrith City Council. I'm not sure if Max is still in the chat, but Andrew was saying he's really interested in the Megalong app's reach. And was there hesitancy from some community members? Did some people need assistance if they weren't good with tech? And how is it moderated? Max, are you with us?
Yes, I've rejoined.
Great. Can you answer that question from Andrew?
Yep, absolutely happy to. So I wouldn't say hesitancy. Really, there's certainly some people who are less familiar with tech, however. So yes, we did definitely need to go through and help set people up, particularly people who are less tech savvy. They might have phones, but they don't know really how to go to the App Store and install stuff and then go through the process of setting up a login to the system and joining the community essentially in the app. So that was just a learning curve. We had trivia nights. I mean, I mentioned those earlier, but basically community get-togethers, and we did it that way, just helping people when they're getting together for social reasons and so on. So in terms of the moderation, we put a significant amount of effort into that because we were concerned about the potential for sort of runaway battles in discussion threads. We absolutely didn't want that. You see that in Facebook, obviously, that the discussion thread is actually not particularly strongly used. It's been useful for just some question and answer stuff on a particular incident, but it is designed to be not particularly engaging. You can't post on others' comments, so you can only put your own sequential questions or answers into the thread. So it tends to dampen things down, but in terms of moderation, all the users are able to flag content as potentially inappropriate. So that is photos, chat comments, or posts, and that those flags get notified to the community administrators, and the administrators can go in and then review, and they've got various different options. They can delete the content. They can go as far as suspend the user, so they become essentially a guest user. They can send a message to the user to notify them that there's been some problem, and they can also do a modification to the post if it's obviously a mistaken entry that could be misinterpreted or something like that. There are a few different mechanisms, and we wanted to have that sort of control, but it is really the response is very much dependent on the judgment of the administrators. So you want to have some people in the community who are appointed administrator of your local Bush Telegraph community who have the sort of sense to make an assessment and respond appropriately.
Thank you so much, Max, for that very comprehensive response. Now, I have a question for the community leaders. So this comes from Liz Murphy from the Primary Health Network. Her question is, being a leader, particularly in these times, can be really rewarding, but also really challenging. How could government and other services best support you? Rosie, do you have any thoughts around how, as a community leader, you can be supported in the important work that you do, both from government and other services?
Yes, well, I think the important thing is to set up relationships with these people in the first place, and some continuity. I've been in the role for 3 years now, and possibly some might say, well, that's a bit long, we need to change. And I'm happy to step down and let someone else take over. But in the meantime, I'm making sure that those relationships that we have are ongoing. And the people that we deal with in federal government, local government, and council, they do change from time to time, But it's important that we keep those relationships up, because they are all important. And you can make a difference yourself, being the leader, and having those relationships. Whereas you could just pick up the phone and they know who you are, and they're happy to talk to you.
Yep. So creating those working relationships, strengthening them, Rosie, is one way
Absolutely.
of keeping those conduits of communication. And it sounds like building positive, trusting relationships is really important.
Very important. And that's how they know that you're there and they're not going to forget about you,
yeah.
Which is also important, to be prominent in their thoughts.
Yes, be the squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
So what about from the other community leaders, Karen, Alan, Kathy, Max? How can government and other services support you in your important roles? And we know how exhausting it is. Karen, you're on mute.
Just from our experience, we went through 3 resilience officers in our time frame, and it really helped with our last one that they had experience and an understanding of this concept of community-led. So there was no resistance on their part. They didn't see themselves as in competition with us. So it was recognizing that there was a legitimate role for community organizations. There were regular conversations. It was, how can I help you? What can we do? Do you want to come to this event? Do you want to talk here? All of that kind of thing. It was a very, very effective partnership. Unfortunately, short-lived, given the amount of grant funding that was available. The other thing I'd like to say too is, in terms of government interventions and funding models, I think it needs to be understood that communities and community organizations are often at different levels of self-organization in terms of how developed they are. And so the type of funding that's available needs to accommodate that. And I guess the best example I've seen of that is the FRRR, the Foundation for Rural and Regional
renewal. Yeah.
Renewal. In that they have, very small grants for organizations that are still developing, and then larger grants are available. So it's acknowledging that communities are at different levels of maturity in terms of being able to be self-led, and enabling them then to move forward and further organize themselves. The other thing that, well, I found personally was just having access to technical expertise. What organizations in the community will do some pro bono work for a community when it comes to advising on contracts, or advising on fire issues, or basically who's who in the zoo, who's out there that can actually help you as a community organization. It acknowledges that you're volunteers, you don't have a lot of money, but again, harnessing that, being able to harness that goodwill that is out there in the community. Yeah, fairly simple things, really, I would think.
Yeah. Kathy, your thoughts?
And also to have some small grant money available for these community groups to get up and running, ones that we don't have to compete against other agencies for, that are quick, so that we can actually start putting our communication methods in place and reaching out to people, because getting yourself started is time where you should be actually doing the work, not trying to get started, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So Kathy, just harking back to what Ellie was saying before, that some grants need to be designed with community organisations specifically in mind, as opposed to you having to compete with large NGOs and other entities. Karen?
And it doesn't take much money. It's not a big amount of money we're talking about, but it would be well spent.
Yeah.
Just to add to Kathy's comment, I can remember the very first grant funding that our association got was $7,000. It was from FRRR. They were trying to help us pull together a grant application. And I believe what swung the deal was that our committee members were actually crying over the phone, saying how difficult it was for them to apply for funding. And that 7,000 made a big difference. That was all the communication activities, a few community events that we ran that got us started. because success gives community organizations the confidence to keep going. Early success is so important.
Good point, Karen. And as we're running low on time, I will just ask our other community leaders, Alan and Max, if you had any thoughts about how government and services can support you in your leadership role. Alan, do you have some thoughts?
Well, this is a very challenging question, and
it
requires a lot of deep thinking, I think. I have virtually given up worrying about grants because I know I'm going to get very far, and that's the message I'm getting from the people at the other end, that it's, you might as well not do this, which is terrible. I've worked with other organisations to get grants, and what happens is that the grant is very heavily weighted to what they want, and we get the scraps. So that doesn't work either.
Yeah.
We need to be recognised in our own right as worthy of these grants. Now, the Mount Irvine Progress Association was first formed in the 1920s. Just a very quick story. Harold Morley, who was one of the three lads, that came to Mount Irvine in the 1800s, he was the driving force between getting the road through to Bilpin. And he used to travel from Mount Irvine in those days, in the 1930s, and talk to individual politicians in Macquarie Street. And I sometimes say to myself, how come I haven't got the energy to do that? So we all need help. And, when you're in a very small community, you get stretched. And I'm not complaining about that, because I know at the end of the day, the rewards for this community and the environment are so great. So we're not going to give up, but it's not easy. And there has to be some, as other people have said, some direct recognition of our efforts and involvement in all of this decision-making process.
Yes. Thank you, Alan. Wonderful points. And Max, for a last brief comment, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I suppose I'd just say that having help, there's help with grants and grant writing and identifying grants. That's one thing. And also help in identifying who the right people are to speak to in government. Sometimes we see issues that are major issues for us, but we just don't know who the right people to speak to are. And perhaps over time, the community association's built experience and maybe has a better sense of that, but I don't think that that's an easy thing for small communities to get a handle on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where regional community associations, like the wonderful people we brought together here, where there are more opportunities for you to network and to share intel and information and skills. So can we, I just want to thank our wonderful panellists, Karen and Kathy, Rosie, Brett, Chris, Alan and Max. And so now we're coming to the final portion of the webinar, and I'm going to hand over to Chan from LCSA, who's going to provide, the final comment before we finish for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for a very rich conversation. I think it's amazing what you have achieved. I really honor your resilience and the work that you have done for your communities. Part of my brief here to wrap things up was to provide a summary, and I feel somewhat inclined not to do so, because what you have said should stand alone and should have its own credibility. Summarizing everything that has been said with all its nuances and its details, I think wouldn't do it justice. I would like to say that this is a beginning of what I hope will be a stronger advocacy from organizations like ANCOS and LCSA. I have a very strong feeling that we've done the right thing by showing up here today, listening to you, and I've already have received messages from colleagues and others that we need to get you probably in front of other politicians and decision makers and policymakers for them to hear firsthand what the blockages are, what the pressure points are, what the opportunities are. So rather than trying to summarize today's rich discussion, I will share with you the slides that I have prepared to wrap up. So just bear with me for 1 second while I bring up my slides. You will see that what you have said resonates with us. We have been in this space, especially together with ANCOS and APSAC, which is the Aboriginal controlled peak body in the community and children's services space. Can you see this screen? And sorry, I don't mean to re-traumatize anyone, but this is the picture, I think, that was taken from a satellite.
We can see your screen. Thanks, Chan.
In the bushfires. I mean, what you see there in red, that are actually flames, right? So firstly, I want to pick up on Chris's point in relation to rethinking the paradigm. So when we talk about service delivery and community development, there's actually a very important new element to our policy platform and our argument, and I would encourage you strongly to adopt that language of having essential social infrastructure. The term social infrastructure is not a new concept, but it is quite surprising as to how little Guernsey it gets. Like Brett Henderson said, the legislation around social infrastructure is almost non-existent. Our colleagues from neighborhood and community centers would remember that their seed funding in the 1980s in particular came from the Department of Planning and Infrastructure. It was actually seen as an investment into social infrastructure. We as LCSA believe that the time is right to make strong representation to government and decision makers, and maybe even other investors, to say that you need to put money and policy legislation around the notion of creating essential social infrastructure and maintaining it. So this whole argument around competing for funding, I mean, let's not enter a political or economical debate as to where we are ideologically. I mean, competitive tendering in itself may work in some markets, but it does not work in the not-for-profit and social services market. It favors large organizations over small ones. It favors large contracts over community-led contracts. And it basically pits people against each other when we are actually in it all together. So the notion, this is probably another webinar, but we talk about competing with rather than against as a concept that hopefully will get the ear of Treasury and politicians one day. So the point that Chris was making around rethinking the disaster management stages, I mean, this is a very simplified version, 1, 2, 3. But what it comes down to is that our research and our experience has shown that it's the preparedness and it's the long-term recovery that requires and often sees community-led leadership. We do acknowledge, and again, Chris, I think, very eloquently said that, we are very fortunate with the institutions and authorities that are here in New South Wales and Australia that actually support us in times of need and in times of crisis. You wouldn't want to live in another country, really. And I say that with pride as a migrant, having been welcomed into this country. I think it is amazing what is being done when things are dire. So stage 2 does not necessarily or at all need community-led leadership. It needs government leadership. But by acknowledging that, we need to pivot in and out of stages 1, 2, and 3 in a way that government and communities alike are conscious and aware of the fact that, generally speaking, except it is a crisis situation and it needs immediate emergency relief and response, it is the community that leads the disaster management work. And this is just a picture that actually, I think exemplifies that. So one of the things that probably we need to talk about deeper and would be a keynote in itself is that what we have found over the years, the role is of neighborhood and community centers here on this slide, but that certainly applies to progress associations and community-led organizations that are not neighborhood centers like the ones we've heard from today. They all play a role, willingly or unwillingly. But what we have found is that the more credibility and authority an organization has at the point of crisis, the more likely and the more intense their role is in terms of the long-term recovery, in terms of its effectiveness. And the pivoting in and out of the stages is certainly the main challenge. And here's just one last thought for you to take away, and that is that we are not dealing with a singular kind of event most of the time. I mean, that is certainly can be the case. But during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen that with the pandemic and a natural disaster, we're straight away in this situation where you have two disasters hitting a community at the same time. And when you think about the stages, disasters, depending on what they are, they run at different paces and in different ways. So a flood, can be announced days before it comes, and you can prepare. Bushfires are very unpredictable, but they come very fast, and they can burn and crash very quickly. And then you have things like a drought, which is happening very, very slowly. And where are we at in terms of preparedness, crisis, or recovery? And when you think about those different dynamics of each disaster, and if you accept the assumption that there is more than one disaster in a community at any given point in time, then we are actually ending up in this really messy web of trauma in what we call the compounding effect. So things are compounding on top of each other, and community groups and community organizations, and dare I say probably government as well, don't actually know where they're at, in what stage, for what particular disaster. You might be dealing with preparing for one disaster, dealing with a crisis of another, and being in recovery of a third, then maybe being hit by a fourth. And I think that sophisticated understanding is simply not there. So the work that we're doing with NCOS, APSEC, and our community partners is very much trying to understand how we can influence policymakers and decision makers in understanding that community level intervention and community led responses understand this sophisticated, deeper kind of web of trauma that exists in a community. Another speaker did say that, or I think it was a comment, that 2 years is not enough. Short-term funding is not enough. Hence the social infrastructure argument. It needs to be invested in constantly. We don't ask for a road to be built and then for it just to fall apart. Once a road is built, it needs upkeep, it needs maintenance, and it needs to be developed as the traffic changes. And it's the same thing that we are arguing for in terms of social infrastructure. So I might stop at that point, but look, if you are interested in our narrative, if you are interested in the work that we do, if you want to be involved further, then you are warmly invited to join LCSA's Trauma-Informed Community Development Training, which builds on these concepts that I've shared with you and goes much deeper. This invitation is for all of you that are here, and obviously there will be an investment of time, and there might be a small cost to cover our outgoings, but it goes over 2 days, and there will be dates announced for 2025. And if you're okay with that, we will send out an email to all the attendees today, and you can keep abreast of any developments. So you are all, that is community groups, government agencies, and other people that are here today, warmly invited to join us and delve deeper into these concepts. But our invitation number 2 is very much targeted for the local community groups and community organizations that I think have expressed quite openly that the engagement piece is probably key. The cynical me says that, you know, if there was political will, then the funding application process wouldn't be such a big issue. So while there's cynicism in that, I think there's a lot of truth in that as well. I do believe firmly that by influencing, educating, and also maybe convincing the political leadership in our state that we need changes, only then, I think, can we garner enough support for political will to change legislation and to change the way that that communities are resourced to be better capable of dealing with any disasters if or when they hit. So again, based on our attendees list, if you are happy to receive these invitations, we will email you. But otherwise, do mark this date in your diary. It's the 8th of April. It will go for 2 hours. I'll be facilitating it. There will be some concepts I've talked about here that we will delve deeper into, but there will be certainly a stronger view on how you can organize locally to have maybe some impact on your political leadership that you are trying to influence. If I now may ask, if it hasn't happened already, my colleagues to put in a link to this form, which is a survey where we would appreciate your feedback on this session. And if you have any further questions, comments, or any feedback that you would like to share, you can also quickly use your phone or other device to scan that QR code that will take you straight to the survey. The survey is now open, so we would be keen to get your feedback. And there are my details. If you want to contact us, please do not hesitate to send me an email. And at that point, I think it just falls upon me to thank Anne, her entire team, MCRN, Cara, ENCOS, Cara and her team, and certainly not just me from LCSA, but my very capable and supportive team who made this event happening. And I think that, Anne, congratulations on what you have achieved with Resilient Villages. It breaks my heart to see that you have not been able to secure ongoing funding for your initiatives, but you have created a groundswell of community-led community organizations and community groups that are very capable, very committed, and certainly inspiring. So if there is a legacy that you've left, I think we've seen it today. So congratulations, and I hope that you all enjoyed this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Chan. Thank you, everybody. And we look forward to receiving your feedback. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today.